Good morning, students. You are welcome once again to our biology lesson for today. And part of our learning experience of SS2 is that we are going to continue our content of the material under the skeletal system. As you can see, we'll be dealing with materials on the mammalian skeleton, and specifically, we'll be focusing on other parts of the skeleton that we have considered. For basic classification today, we are going to look at what we are having on the screen, the part that is made of the appendicular skeleton. As you can see from the image of the skeleton here, the skeleton we learned is made of two parts already. The axial skeleton, which is found in the central axis, as you can see from this animation. And also the axial skeleton is composed of the skull, the ribs there, and finally we have what is called the sternum. And we must not forget what is known as the vertebral column. These have been considered as part of the axial skeleton. But for today, we'll be looking at the appendicular skeleton. That is these sides that are attached to the axial. That is the pectoral girdle specifically. We'll look at the pectoral limb. That is the bones of the arm. And then we'll look at the pelvic girdle here. That is this one. That's what is called the pelvic girdle. Sorry that the arrow is not pointing there. That's the pelvic girdle here. And then we'll have the bones of the pelvic limb. That is the bones of the leg. So for the benefit of our lesson today, we'll be focusing on the pectoral girdle and the bones of the arm. All right. So this means that my lesson will focus more on the bones of the pectoral girdle and bones of the arm. Now, the pectoral girdle is made of the scapula, which is also called the shoulder blade. From the previous note we gave you, you will come to see that everything here like this is the appendicular skeleton. So this area is what I'll be dealing with here today, and then we'll talk about the bones of the arm. So I'll be drawing a clear-cut diagram of all these parts, because we cannot actually understand this content without really looking at the images. So this is the scapula, then these are the bones of the arm made of the humerus, the elbow points here, then the radius and the ulna, and then the bones of the hand made of the carpals, the metacarpals, and then the phalanges. And then we'll have, from this scapula here, we'll have what is called a collarbone or clavicle attached. So I have already drawn these diagrams, which is going to be the basis of this lesson for this morning. Now, when you look at the note here, the appendicular skeleton or appendages, they are parts fused to the axial skeleton, right? They are parts that are fused to the axial skeleton, and they are made of the following parts. I said we have the pectoral girdle, as you can see here, and then the shoulder blade made of the scapula and the collarbone. Then we have the pelvic girdle made of the hip bones and the waist. Now, the forelimb here are the bones of the arm. These are made of the humerus, the radius and ulna, the carpal, the metacarpal, and the phalanges. This will come up as hind limb on a subsequent lesson. But for the benefit of our discussion today, to understand what we are dealing with, I'll be focusing more on the pectoral girdle and the forelimb found in the upper part of the body. So I have come up with a diagram that is coming up very soon, and the diagram is what I've drawn here, right? Now, this one here is called the scapula when you are looking at it from the surface. And this one here will represent the humerus, the bone of the upper arm. And then this one here is going to represent the bone of the radius and the ulna. Now, this scapula you see here, when you draw it out, as you can see, this you are going to draw in your notebook at the end of the lesson. This is the diagram that we want you to take note of for WAEC. It has a cavity here that is called the glenoid cavity. All right, this cavity is known as the socket. That's the socket of the scapula, all right? And it is a socket because it receives the head of the bone of the humerus, this anterior head here. This head of the bone of the humerus is known as the ball. So this ball head enters into this socket to form what is called a ball and socket joint on our shoulder, right? So the glenoid cavity is here that form a ball and socket joint with the head of the humerus. So this is the glenoid cavity of the scapula, a very important joint that you must know. Now we have additional projections on it. This point is called the caracoid. That is where the collarbone articulates with, this caracoid. I showed you the collarbone in an aerial drawing. Then you have the acromion and the metacromion processes here. These two processes are meant for the attachment of muscles. Once the muscles are attached there, it allows for free movement of the shoulder. The spine here is also for muscle attachment. This is the flat surface of the scapula called the scapular blade. And you have this ridge, this cartilage ring here that is allowed to be present there to allow to reduce friction. So we have two shoulder blades actually. And as I said, the shoulder blade is also known as the scapula. But take note of the glenoid cavity. So this is what makes up the pelvic girdle. So the bone of the pelvic girdle is made of this scapula, this caracoid, and then that is attached to the collar bone, right? Then the bones of the arm, which is the humerus here. The humerus, if you look at it, is a very short bone in the upper arm. And interestingly, the length of the bone itself is called the shaft. Take note of that. Then you'll notice these side projections here and this side projection here. This one that is bigger is called greater tuberosity, while this one that is smaller is called the lesser tuberosity. The tuberosities are meant to allow our muscles to attach to them so that our muscles like the bicep and tricep can easily be there for contraction and movement, all right? Then coming to the lower part of the posterior humerus here, you have what is called the trochlear foramen. This trochlear foramen is a small hole closer to the lower part of the humerus there. It is a hole meant for the passage of blood vessels, all right? And the nerves pass through there. So the blood vessel passes through there, very important part. Then you have this cavity called the groove. The groove is called the trochlear groove, very important, which of course will be used to articulate with this other groove here of the ulna that allow us to carry out what is called the hinge joint and hinge movement, all right? So the swollen outer part is called the condyle, all right? So please take note that this aspect here, this lower posterior end called the trochlear groove, forms a hinge joint with this groove here of the ulna, and the groove is known as what? The sigmoid notch. That's why I said it forms the hinge joint, right? So now when you look at it, this and this form a hinge joint, while this one and this one form a ball and socket joint. Now when you come to the hand itself, the lower hand made of the radius and the ulna. The ulna is the longer bone and is the biggest, all right? And it is the ulna that forms the elbow point here. The elbow point of our bone of ulna is known as the olecranon. Then the one on top, the smaller bone on top is called the radius. Then you find the bone of the wrist here, bones of the hand itself, and then the fingers. The bones of the wrist are 8 in number. They are called the carpals. The bones of the hand are called the metacarpals, and the bones of the digits are called the phalanges. So that when you look at the whole setup, the scapula articulates with the head of the humerus at the point called the glenoid cavity to form a ball and socket joint, while the posterior end of the humerus at the point of the trochlear groove articulates with the sigmoid notch of the ulna to form a hinge joint. Then somewhere at the wrist here, we find the edge of the ulna forming the wrist bone here, which of course is not labeled, and I call it the gliding joint. So these are the bones of the pectoral girdle and the bones of the arm. This video is I prepared it deliberately to allow you to understand the content, because without the diagram like this, you cannot understand it. So my name once again is Mr. Simon Ape, your biology teacher. Remember, I collaborated with my colleagues to present this video, and I hope it will be useful in understanding. PowerPoints will be sent to you to understand this material subsequently, all right? So you update your note from the PowerPoint, and I hope the lesson will be useful. So this is how we'll call it a day for now, and I hope the lesson is well understood. So at this point, I want to say thank you for listening, and bye.